Focus stacking is not a new technique, but it is one that I recently took a deep dive into as I try to find ways to keep the photography going while staying closer to home. This is episode 153 of the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast for October 30, 2022. Hello and welcome back to the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast. I am your host, Brent Bergherm, and I just love helping you to pursue your purpose in the great outdoors. And of course, that's the photographic purpose. It's all about what's going on outside, and we just love getting out there and shooting more and more all the time. And certainly one thing that's been happening in my life recently is I just haven't been getting outdoors like I really, really need to. But that's partly why I've decided I'm going to take up this idea of macro photography. And this, what we're going to talk about in today's episode is deep focus or focus stacking and the like. And this whole just wonderful notion of macro opens up a whole new world. And that is just wonderful to explore. And so I really encourage you, if you don't have the money for a macro lens, because they're definitely expensive, I definitely encourage you to consider the idea of either getting some macro lens attachments. So they will, these are things that are screwed onto the front of your lens like a filter. So that's, I don't know, they probably cost you $40 to $60 possibly. I haven't even priced them, so I don't even know what they're going to be. But they're going to be a quick and easy way to get into this close focusing or this macro type work. Or get yourself some extension tubes. They'll do roughly the same thing. And as far as I'm concerned, a medium-sized extension tube, neighborhood of 18, 15, 12 millimeters, somewhere in there, with a longer lens, so something in the neighborhood of 80 to 200 millimeter lens. Those are, that's where you find your sweet spot in getting some macro stuffs going on. But hey, I do have a few other items I wanted to talk about, just to give you a brief idea of a few other things going on before we do our deep dive in this whole idea of focus stacking. And that is one of the most exciting things that's pretty much ever happened in my photography life. I got a printer. I think I made an announcement. I honestly can't remember. A couple of months ago, I was literally given an Epson 9900. This is a 44-inch wide printer. And the fellow that owned it, he just contacted me. He had previously known me from some other items and whatnot. And he was just like, hey, this is just sitting around. It's clogged. It doesn't work. Do you want it? And I'm just like, well, I have brought an Epson or two back from the dead. So I'm thinking I could do it again. So I was just like, absolutely, I'm all over it. So I got it and put it in my shop. And I had initially made plans to convert part of my shop to a print studio, but decided to put money into other things and to put that print studio on hold for a little bit. Well, fast forward a couple of months and the same fella contacts me and he's all like, Brent, I've got another one. It's the exact same model. And he's upgrading his printer. And this one has less use on it. So basically the amount of printing that this one has done is about half of what the other one is. So it's just not as used, but also it's working. So bonus. And he's like, I'll give it to you, but I need you to buy the ink from me. And so the ink that is in there, and then the two fresh cartridges also that came with it, in total, it's about equal to a full accomplishment of ink. And so that's in the neighborhood of $1,200 to $1,500, depending on where you buy it from. So I was just like, okay, yeah, how are we going to do that? I'll find a way. So he wasn't ready to pull that, to make that happen just yet. He wanted to keep it around until he had his new one in shop. He had it on order, and it was going to be delivered in a little while. So we contacted each other again and said, hey, it's about time. I was like, I'm trying to get the cash together. I've got this truck to sell. And he literally responded saying, well, would you be willing to just trade it for the truck? And this is an old, it's a Bondo special with the paint job, just hideous looking, but a really good rough and tumble truck for the farm kind of a thing. But it was just way too big for our farm. And it's a Ford, it's a 1975 Ford. I think it's an F-250, but I don't know that they even considered them F-250s or 150s or whatever back then. and it's got the super cab and the long bed, and it's just a really long truck. And I was just like, it's yours. So I traded a nice old truck, a nice old beater truck, for this printer, and I couldn't be happier. I put a poll out there in the Facebook group. Some of you saw that and you responded. Thank you for everyone who responded saying, what should I print first? Something from Croatia, something from Alaska, something else or whatever. And so the Croatia won. And so what I ended up doing was I printed a 23-inch by 68-inch image of Dubrovnik up from the Bosanka overview. So if you look at the map and type in Bosanka, it's Bosanka, but they pronounce it Bosanka. You'll see where that is, and then I'm looking down on the old town. And I've previously published an image in the past from that location, but I didn't do the pano. So this pano was a new thing for me. And so I had to do the processing. I had to get it sized right, sharpened right, all that good stuff ready to print. And I had on order a 24-inch roll of paper. I figured I'm going to start small as I get my feet wet into this thing with this new printer of mine. I then printed something from Plitvice Lakes. I made a 20-inch wide vertical image and also printed that out. And of course, oh my goodness, love it. They're gorgeous. They're amazing. I'm just so thrilled to have finally a massive printer. It's going to be amazing. When I do get that print shop, and when I do get the print studio, I should say, run up and running in the shop, my hope will be that I can run on-site workshops here at the farm. We can go out and shoot flowers and shoot whatever, shoot locally. There's lots of great beauty locally. And then we will go into the print studio, and we're going to make some just beautiful, wonderful prints of your work. That's still a few years down the line, but it's coming. It's one of those big, hairy, audacious goals that I've had for a while, ever since we bought this place over 2 years ago. And one major step in the right direction for sure. And this is just amazing. Now, I had a question from one of the listeners that I thought I would address here as well about acquiring this printer. And he said, how much time do you think it took you to get running? I mean, from delivery and any learning curve, asking for a friend with big dreams and no money. Well, that's about me, big dreams and no money. Thankfully, I had a truck. So, yes. How much time to get up and running? It actually wasn't that bad. If this were for someone and you were brand new to this, and let's say you bought the printer new, expect it to take at least a week, if not more, to get shipped to you. It's going to have to be shipped on a big courier truck. This is not something that FedEx or UPS is going to be able to drop off for you. And it is heavy. So his new printer, it was not already installed on the stand. It took 4 people plus a fifth to maneuver the stand underneath it to get this thing up and on the stand. Now, the one that I have, the unit I have, it was already on the stand and we did not take it off, but I did have to lower it down a stairway, and he already had a ramp set up. The owner had already had a ramp set up. So we just put a big, huge strap around it, and I was the one holding the strap because it's my printer. I figure I better be the one responsible for it. And then I had some people, my son, stepfather-in-law, guiding it down this ramp, down the stairs. So getting it in here, getting it over here took, just a couple of hours to move it. And it really only needed to go, I lived like a mile away from the fellow. So it only had to come about a mile. And then it sat in my garage for a few days just because I didn't have time to set it up. I then finally moved the things out of my office, which is inside my garage. It's a nice finished space, but it's inside my garage, and moved it in. And then I was like, yeah, I need paper. So I ordered the paper, and then I'm like, I need a long enough USB cord. And so I'm scrummaging, figuring what else I can do for that. So it took me more than a week, just about, from the time I received the printer to the time I actually got a print going. Actually, it wasn't more than a week. It was 6 days. So 5 days. So anyway, with all that in line there, you could do this a lot sooner. Now, the question also had something to do with learning curve. I've been running a printer like this for over 10 years. And so on the learning curve side of thing, there was nothing for me to worry about, except for this one. They actually updated how the paper loads compared to the printer that I'm used to. And so these the print spools that grab the paper roll are genius. I love the new design of these things. They're just brilliant compared to the really old design that has a full-on spindle that, yeah, it's just terrible compared to these. But then also loading the paper, there was a little bit of tiniest of errors that I made in loading the paper. But after learning its procedure, its specific procedure for what buttons you need to push and whatnot, it took me all of 3 or 5 minutes to load the paper and get it going. And then when you install the print driver, it installs all of the profiles for all of the Epson papers. And I specifically chose to start off with an Epson paper because that my experience tells me when I'm going to an Epson paper on the Epson machine and the profile and all these things, they just really mesh together really well, and it's simple. So when I do something else with Kansan Infinity or Handy Mule or any of these other paper manufacturers, I just have to make sure I load their specific ICC profile for this specific machine. And that's not a problem. It's just something that you just got to make sure you're doing it right. And that's largely what I cover, a lot, I should say, of what I cover in my master photo printing course that is available on the Great Outdoors Photography School. So if you get onto my website, I've got a link. It's the first item on your app show notes. So when you're listening to this and you have your app, there's a link there for my website and then /photo-school. That'll take you to the description page of Great Outdoors Photography School. And I've got the Master Photo Printing and the Designing Creativity and Photography, 2 top-level courses that will dive you so deep into these individual topics. And the great thing about the Master Photo Printing course is that I approach it in a broad enough sense to get you going no matter what printer you have. But for those of you who have Epsons, for those of you who have Canons, I do split it out because the experience is just a little bit different. So you've got some of those specific trainings going on there, but also I show you a lot of different options for why I did what I did. So not just this type of photo, but different genres of photos that we'll gather in the travel and outdoor type space. And I talk you through it, and I help you understand the thought process behind going through all of these different settings, going through all of these different parameters that we just have to think about when it's time to get a nice quality print coming out of that image. So hopefully that answers your question. And if you have any other questions about operating a big printer like this, by all means, please get them into me. Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com would be fantastic. You can contact me there, and that would just be great. I'd be happy to answer any questions about running a big printer like this. In the short term, my plan will be to certainly get my own website going as it relates to my gallery images. And there's another little announcement I wanted to make. I've finally made the final decision for about the 3rd time, I'm going to say, and maybe it'll be a 4th time, on what to do with my online photo gallery. And it's go time finally. I've got my first gallery up. There's no links on my website yet to get to that place. I'm just finally at that point to where I say, okay, my solution is finally settled. I don't know why I spent so much time on this. It's one of those things, done is better than perfect. Get it out there. Well, I think I'm finally going to be done with the idea of making the decision, but now I'm finally going to be able to get images out there. And that's going to be great. So I want to use this printer to certainly provide fine art prints of my work. I don't think I'm going to have massive sales by any means, especially not in the first year or so. But I do have some contacts with some local artists that I'm going to get those going and see if I can't make some reproduction prints of their artwork. So I've already had 2 people reach out to me or otherwise tell me, you know what, this is a good idea. And we would love to explore these options. And I've got more people in mind of who I can talk to. So if I can do some of these fine art reproductions, whether I print them on canvas, print them on paper, some other type of material, because I can go on a wide variety of materials that we have available now for this type of printer. I'm looking forward to doing that kind of work. Making stuff and getting some really quality prints out, that just really gets my juice flowing. And I really love doing that kind of stuff. Okay, that's it for the announcements or, the other little stuff that I want to talk about. Let's get going on this topic of focus stacking and achieving tons of depth of field. Now, there's actually a couple of ways that we're going to be looking at this. The first is going to be what I'm going to kind of consider to be a standard, I guess, focus stack. And what I mean by that is not macro. And so I actually have two different posts on my website about this. They're both linked in the show notes. In fact, the show notes listing is one of those posts. So if you go to brentbergherm.com/episode/153, that's going to be the item that is all about this episode. But within that post, I have another link to another post that is just on my standard blog feed. And that one is called Focus Stacking, Solving the Problem of Not Enough Depth of Field. And so I published that one way back in September. So this whole thing about this focus stacking, you're going to get a lot of detail on this post and what I'm going to talk about here. But it talks about an image that I made when I was at Theodore Roosevelt National Park over a year ago now. I can't believe my sabbatical was over a year ago now. That is just so crazy. So what is it all about? What's this whole idea of focus stacking? Well, certainly it's about depth of field. And the depth of field is the range in your image of acceptably sharp focus. It extends in front of and behind your in focus or whatever it is you're focusing on. And when you are getting your depth of field, you are usually making a decision. The photographer usually is making a decision that says, I want this in focus and that out of focus, or whatever the case is. Really shallow depth of field, really long depth of field. That's our goal. Well, what happens if you just simply are at the limits of what your camera's depth of field will even do for you? Or maybe you have to chop it down so much, like f/22, f/32, and you're getting this phenomena called diffraction that's going on. Because when you chop that aperture way down, your diffraction starts going crazy. And that's not good because it's going to cause your image to become softer overall. And this is an overall softening, not just a focus feel softening, but just overall, everything will feel fairly soft. So you could also run into some problems to say, well, at this shutter speed that's acceptable for me, and then if I'm at f/22 or f/16, whatever the case is, that you're at that limit of what's acceptable for your diffraction, and you do have just enough depth of field, at least that you're convinced is enough depth of field anyway, but then you're at too high of an ISO for what is acceptable to you. So that might be another reason why you would open up the lens so you can keep that ISO down low, but then you have to do a focus stack so you can get multiple items, multiple frames, so that you can have a greater depth of field going on. And then there's this whole idea of depth of field where it really came to its, oh boy howdy, it came to the top. It rushed to the surface when I was doing that shot in Alaska. And I've talked about this in a previous episode. I think it was just the previous episode. But anyway, I had this nice river shot, beautiful scenery, everything looked good. When I'm on screen, everything is looking beautiful and sharp, well configured, everything's good. But when I zoom in, that's when it changes and it gets shallow. It gets a little bit soft, I should say. And that's one of those things where the calculation of your depth of field is based on your increasing the image to about an 8x10 in size. And so if you make it larger, you have a different depth of field calculation going on. And so that's where a little bit of this extra care in saying, okay, I'm going to get a focus stack and I'm going to ensure that I have maximum focus in the places that I need it to be. And I'm not going to let the fact that I'm making a really large print cause my depth of field to go sour, this is going to be something that's to my benefit then to get a focus stack. So I think you can see how it's all coming together for me. I've got a really large printer now. And when I make really large prints of these really small subjects, the shallowness of my depth of field is emphasized or magnified is maybe a way to put it. And so that can just be a problem when I'm trying to make big prints because it's no longer an 8x10, it's a 20x30 or something else along those lines. So this is where focus stacking just really has its place, where you just have stuff that's just way out of your camera's range anyway, your lens's range anyway, of being able to capture things both in focus or three things or whatever in focus. And you get this idea of saying, look, I'm going to make massive prints, and that changes whenever you type into your depth of field calculator on your phone or whatever. It just changes those things. And most of your depth of field calculators won't allow you to alter what the output size is, which would then give you an accurate idea of what the true depth of field is when you alter that output size. All right, so there's a lot to think about there when we're looking at understanding what's going on with the depth of field and focus stacking. So the solution to all this, of course, is to just do the focus stacking. And you could do this manually. I have done focus stacks manually, and they are a pain in the rear. Getting some software like Helicon Focus. Now, there are some other softwares out there as well, but the one I'm using is Helicon Focus. And so getting the software to help you along the way can be very advantageous. And the biggest reason why doing the focus stacking in a manual sense is such an annoyance is because of those overlapping areas. I mean, there was a shot I did down in the Redwoods area of California, far north California, just about on the Oregon border. And I had this tree, this sequoia that was had fallen over. Moss was growing on it, and there were some things behind it and whatever else. It was a very nice composition, very nice little piece, and I really liked it, but I was just like, man, I have to do focus stacking. And this was several years. I shot this in 2017, I think it was. And so when you have that object, so you focus on the foreground objects. And so you have this log and it's curling back or curving back. And then you have the moss on the very top edge of the log. And that's all fine and great. But those items behind it, whatever that is, they are out of focus. And then when you go to that frame that you captured the background area in focus, then those items in front are out of focus. And when something's out of focus, it blurs out and it goes beyond its edges. And that is the pain in the rear that you have to work with the software so that you get the right thing in the right places. Oh, it's just a pain in the butt to make it happen. What I ended up doing was I literally masked that foreground image and I just bumped it up in the frame in the overall canvas area in Photoshop so that it was masked out, and those little details of that moss and those leaves and those twigs and whatever else that were on the top of that log, as they transitioned to the background space, I was just able to mask that, and I just nudge it up about, 50 pixels or so, and I got rid of all of that hideous, that blurriness of that same subject that was blurry. But the background, of course, was in focus, that frame. When that's all stacked together, and then I just nudge that up, you can't tell a difference of what I did as far as nudging it up. So I figured, yeah, it works fine. It's good. But what if you don't have that opportunity? What if you need to leave it there and you got to work with it and you have these very intricate details overlapping something that is 50 feet behind it? And you want both of them in focus? That's where the software like Helicon Focus comes in, and it is way better than what Photoshop does. Now, to be fair to Photoshop and Adobe, they just released the 2023 version of Photoshop, which is a little buggy. I've had it crash several times on me already. So I then reinstalled the 2022 version. So in the 2022 version, focus stacking is not that good. And I even give you some examples on this blog post that we're linking to. And in the 2023 version, I just haven't tested it out to see if that's one of the areas that they offered improvement. All right, so we're going through this blog post now. Again, this is the blog post titled Focus Stacking, Solving the Problem of Not Enough Depth of Field. And this is a non-macro approach right now. So the first pictures I give you is a detailed shot of the problem areas, and that is showing near focus, or the focus, I should say the frame where the focus is on the near objects, and then the frame where the focus is on the far or the distant objects. And since I'm standing on the ledge of a little bit of a precipice or a little bit of a cliff or something like that at Theodore Roosevelt National Park in this particular shot, there's just a lot of distance between those two subjects. And unless I'm at like 11 millimeters or 16 millimeters, something like that, this just isn't going to work so well. And if I remember right, I was in the neighborhood of 28 or so millimeters when I shot this one. And I was, in this particular shot, using f8. The lens is a sweet spot. So it means I get a decent amount of depth of field, but it's also about as sharp as it's going to get. If I were to take that down and go to like f22, I still did not get every single item in focus. So that's another part of what we're dealing with here. Is just such a vast distance between these two objects. I just can't get them all in the same frame in focus, in the same focus, I should say, in focus. I even tried this idea of, to use the term hyperfocal distance is the wrong term, but it's the closest thing I can think to on this. And that is to not focus on either the near object or the far object, but to focus between them so that the depth of field could include the foreground object and the depth of field could include the background object. That also wasn't a possibility in this setup. All right, so with the focus stacking process, with the plugin they have for Lightroom, it's pretty easy. You can just right-click it, you head on over to Helicon Focus. However, using the export function and choosing the Helicon Focus option in the export dialog box can help you if you want to make sure, if you paid your full money and you want to Helicon Focus and you want to take advantage of the DNG processing, then it's best to at least do that once so that you can set up the defaults. And then every time you do that, by right-clicking on the images and then just choosing under export, you have the Helicon Focus options there. And this is exactly the screenshot I'm showing you when I'm doing this. You're able to then use that preset that you've then already set to make sure you have your raw support all the way through Helicon Focus. Now, if you haven't paid the extra money to Helicon Focus, you won't have raw support. You'll only be able to do JPEGs or TIFFs, which still gives you some good stuff. It's just you want to make sure that you process your images fully before you get to Helicon Focus. I liked the idea of being able to just send the raw data and then bring it back in and then continue my processing that way. All right, so with the details, they've got plenty of different rendering method options. They have a method A, they call weighted average, method B, which is a depth map, and method C, which they call pyramid, and method B is the default option. And they have a radius setting of 8 and a smoothing setting of 4. Now, certainly if you want to go to the Helicon Focus website and read what they have to say about all these descriptions, that's great. But on my post, I put it in a little bit more something that's akin to something that is easier for us to understand, I think. A little bit more in layman's terms type of an idea. They say that method B is great for images with a simple surface, something like a sidewalk or a street. Predictable, simple, and easy to progress from one area to the next, both physically and visually. It's essentially smooth and nothing is too fancy about your overall subject. The Helicon Focus engineers suggest that for these types of subjects, method B will be the best, but also method A and method C can produce fine results as well. So what I found to be the case, method B was a disaster for what I was using it for, because it's not simple, and we don't have a simple transition from the foreground elements to the background elements. And I give you the example here on the website as well of why it was a disaster. So I have in the first one here, method B with a radius 8 and a smoothing set to 4, and then I changed it up and did method B with a radius 1 and a smoothing set to 1. And it was a little better, but still it had too many areas that were just not transitioning the way I needed it to transition. Now, the Helicon Focus page says that method A works best on images where preserving color and contrast is a priority. Now, there's one thing here on the images that I was doing, I never noticed any shift at all about anything color or contrast related. Now, I haven't been doing a whole lot of images, so that's certainly something where if I were in doing some bugs or other really intricate details, maybe this is something that would become present or become noticeable. But in the images that I've worked on, I've never noticed that to be a problem. They also say for method A, if you happened to shoot the focus stack out of order, method A is a good choice, as is method C, but method B is not. So method B wants those images in complete sequence. Method A is not recommended for image stacks of 100 or more frames. All right, so that takes that out when we get to our deep focus stacking stuff. And it performs well if there's a glare in the image, and they claim that it performs well with subjects that have a simple surface. They also suggest it performs well with images that may have crossing lines and changes in surface level. Well, that sounds like my image. I've got these grasses that are growing up, and they are coming off of the cliff's edge, and they're going up and over the background area. And so that sounds like this. That sounds like it might be good. And I had, I think, only 3, maybe it was only 2 different frames. Anyways, a very simple stack as it relates to how many frames that I was trying to blend together in the focus stack. So my examples, actually method A performed rather poorly as well. And so I did a method A radius 8 smoothing 4, and then also radius 1 smoothing 1 once again. And to judge the idea of performing poorly, it's all about making sure it can grab the elements that are in focus and grab and ignore the elements that are out of focus. Now, another thing to think about, Helicon Focus does have the option for going in and retouching up your work. And I have found that to be very helpful in some areas where there's just a tiny amount of oopsies. But when you have a large amount of oopsies, I have found it to be really problematic. And I found it problematic on this image as well, because all those different grasses and whatnots, it just is just too much. Either the software has to do a good job or it doesn't. And getting into the nuances of trying to pick out the right layer and get the right thing going and whatever else, it can be really problematic of making that choice and trying to find the right thing that makes it work. Okay, so here we go. Method C, the only thing that method C is not recommended for is subjects that have glare. They say it performs wonderfully with image stacks with more than 100 frames and for subjects that may have crossing lines and changes in surface level. All right. Well, I don't have the more than 100 frames on this one, but I do have crossing lines and changes in surface level for sure. Also shown in the detail example here, method C wins the day, it says, is what I wrote. So method C is not, they don't have an option for setting the radius. They only have an option for setting the smoothness. So I thought that was interesting too. So I tried 2 different renderings with this one and set it to 1, and another one I set to 4, and I could not see any difference whatsoever. However, on this subject, there is one area actually where there's a blade of grass that it looks like it's duplicated. And so there is one little tidbit of an error that is just a little bit too much, but the rest of it as it comes in looks pretty good. And I was really pleased with how that came out. So let's talk a little bit about on those methods A and B, we have this radius settings. And the Helicon Focus engineers, they recommend experimentation, of course. And I always say that too. Just experiment. You can't break it. Just figure it out. And what's nice too about Helicon Focus, when you are rendering those items and you're saying, hey, I'm going to change the radius, I'm going to hit the render button, it just kind of saves it for you. And you can hop back and forth and you can see the different rendering previews. And so that's really cool. I really like that. But if your image has a lot of fine details, you probably are going to want a small radius setting. And if you don't have many details that are ultra fine, then possibly the larger setting will be appropriate. So definitely check it out, test it out, and see what works for you if that's something that you want to get into. With these smoothing settings, when focus stacking, certainly it's a trick to blend those areas from different frames so that it looks like it all belongs and it looks cohesive. These transitions can be very tricky to accomplish, and this is what the smoothing settings do for you. So what I noticed was, especially method A and B, when you are doing a large smoothness setting, you're really giving it a lot of license, I guess is the best way to put it, to just make things up or to have that transition be really loosey-goosey. And if you tighten that smoothness setting, you're going to really have a really sharp edge on that element that is in the foreground and as it bleeds off, as it were, into the item that's in the background. So that is, I think that smaller smoothness setting is going to be to your advantage usually. That's what my experience tells me anyway. But again, experiment with your subjects and with your shooting techniques to see what happens and what artifacts or other things happen in your transition areas. There's also the option to align your images in the stack. Hopefully your images are already aligned. Hopefully you've got a solid tripod and you don't have any movements going on. But if there happens to be other movements other than focus breathing anyway, but certainly focus breathing is a reason why you would want to have Helicon Focus adjust your alignment as well, because it can be an issue, especially on the macro type stuffs. Focus breathing can certainly be an issue. But in this particular set of images on this shot from Theodore Roosevelt National Park, I did not see it as a necessity. I did not see it as a requirement to do the alignment because it was just a couple of frames and I just really didn't see that as a big deal at all. All right, the final assembly on this image. Once the stacking was performed, the rest of the image production was rather easy. I brought in the sky image over the foreground, and then I expanded the canvas. So basically this was a little bit of a vertical panorama as well. So I had a sky image, and then I had, of course, the foreground image. So this was 3 frames, but only 2 of those frames were dealt with in Helicon Focus. The other was dealt with in Photoshop. I also had a difference in focal lengths. So basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to emphasize the size and the shape of the clouds. So I zoomed in just a little bit so they would appear a little bit bigger. And so there are some differences there, but it's really easy to get it taken care of in Photoshop and blend that together, because a nice wispy cloudy sky is easy to blend in Photoshop. And if you want to see the details, head on over to that blog post and follow those links from your show notes in your app. And then the first link on the episode show notes will take you to this blog post that I'm talking about. Or you can just type in focus stacking, solving the problem of not enough depth of field. When you get to my site, I've got a little search thing there. You can just type that in. Just type in focus stacking, and you'll be able to see this as one of the results, and you'll be able to find it there. But I have screenshots and all sorts of things of what happened in Photoshop so you can see the final result of what happened with this image. And then I give you a little bit of an idea on what is going on with, oh my goodness, Photoshop Focus Stack. Now, again, this is the 2022 version of Photoshop, but I give you a quick little view of what happened there and why I didn't use it at all. All right, I want to tell you a little bit more about the Great Outdoors Photography School and to invite you to check it out and to see if it's something that might work for you. Especially as we're getting into the new year, I know people are starting to think, well, and you're like, Brent, new year, are you kidding me? We haven't even done Thanksgiving yet. But as we're looking at these items of just growing in our photography and understanding who we are as a person, these are the kinds of things that we definitely look at. We are interested in helping you. I am interested in helping you find greater meaning and purpose in your photography. We do that through practice. We do that through conversation. We do that through inspiration and pretty much holding you accountable as well. So if you'd like to check it out, I invite you to click that link in your show notes. It's the first link in your app show notes. So when you're listening to this on your phone and you click on the show notes item there, there's a link there, brentbergherm.com/photo-school, and you're going to be able to be taken right to this description page for the Great Outdoors Photography School. It's time to dig deep and find greater meaning and purpose in your photography, it says. Tap into your unique vision and create more meaningful photographs. We've got the courses I've already talked about on the website, but we also host one of the defining pieces about this whole program is what we do on a nearly monthly basis. So 4 times a quarter, we get together online and we discuss your images, we discuss your questions, and sometimes I even have assignments for you to work on. And so you can go out and you can achieve those assignments and we talk about them, all with the idea, all with the purpose of challenging you and getting you some good experience and keeping you active in your photography and moving forward in this craft that you love so much. So take a look. It is only $28 a month and it includes, again, those courses, all the tutorials I have on the site, and these things I call quick wins, 4 live group sessions per quarter. Certainly you can get any questions answered via email. And on occasion, we've got some assignments, and always, certainly, we have feedback. So I look forward to, hey, if you've got questions even before you sign up, there is on this page, this photo-school page, at the bottom of the page, there's a form I would love for you to fill out. Please do let me know. If you've got any questions, just put them in right there, hit the send button. You will not be added to any email list or anything like that. This is just purely communicating with me, saying, look, I've got a question about this. Can you help me understand what I would do in this situation, or whatever the case is? Just let me know, and I would love to help you out. All right, now let's talk about deep focus, this whole idea of going macro and going crazy with it. So now I'm going to be talking about the items that you'll find referenced on the show notes site or the show notes page. And that is my website, brentbergherm.com/episode/153. And what we're going to be looking at is going really deep, really awesome in macro. I love the macro. Holy cow, it's so cool. And I also did a video of what I'm talking about here, although I certainly, whenever it's in video, I always tend to cover it in a slightly different fashion. So I've got it linked. You can either just go to my YouTube page, but I also have it linked there on this page that we're talking about, the 153 page that we're talking about. And you can either watch it right there or you can click over to YouTube and watch it. Whatever the case is, whatever suits your fancy. But I had just received the Canon macro lens, the RF100. I received it right about when school started, and boy, howdy, this is always a super busy time. Of course. A couple weeks before we get into school, and then when school is finally up and running, and yeah, it takes it out of my schedule. Basically, it takes me out of my schedule, whatever the case is. But I finally got that box opened, and I went out, broke it free of its box, and went to the back pasture where we have a bit of a swampy, I really should call it a marsh area. We got a variety of grasses and cattails, and there's only so much I can walk into it because I'll sink to my knees. I have yet to build a boardwalk to get out close to some of these other items like the cattails, but in the wintertime when it freezes, I can certainly get out there a little further. But anyway, it's just a small area. It's only Oh, it's probably 75 to 100 feet long by about 50 feet wide or so. And it's just a really cool little place. And it's there because on the adjacent property that's not ours, our neighbors have a little pond that's roughly an acre in size. And it's about 6 feet. Their land mass is about 6 to 8 feet higher than our pasture, this particular pasture we're talking about. And so it just seeps into our area. And we have this beautiful little marsh down there. And it's just way cool. We love it. It's so awesome. And so hunting around in the world of macro is definitely fun and very illuminating when you're just like, wow, look what all is there. The first shot I have on the website is this single drop of dew that's on this blade of grass, and it's just kind of hanging out there. And of course, when you have that, you're then focusing on that drop, and then the grasses that are reflected, that are the drop becomes a lens in and of itself. And that's just so cool when that happens. I love it. But I decided I want a little more. And I was like, you know what? Canon has this focus bracketing setting in the camera now, and I need to figure that out. I need to look at that and really understand how that works. But I came across a couple of bugs and spiders first. In a place like this, the life is just everywhere. It's amazing how it just bursts everywhere. And so I came across this particular spider that I also have on the website. It's underneath a blade of grass, and it's actually, you don't see it, but it's munching on something. So I was a little bit afraid that I was going to cause it to, scurry away, whatever the case. She was just having a good meal, and that's all there is to it. I was really hopeful I was going to be able to find one of our many Northwest tree frogs. We have probably just thousands of them on the farm here. You can always hear them. You go out and there's that little, whatever the sound is. I'm not going to try and make that sound again, but the very distinctive Northwest tree frog. And in that pond I had mentioned on our neighbor's property, there's some bullfrogs up there. Oh my goodness, in the springtime when it's mating season, such an amazing cacophony of sound. But these Northwest tree frogs, they're everywhere and they're always croaking, and especially when you're down there in the marshy area. I did not find any on this shoot, so I will be hunting again, and I will find some more in the future for sure. But got that spider, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to grab my first focus stack. And the first stack using Canon's focus bracketing feature. And I did this with, I guess they're kind of flowers. There's these tiny little pinkish, lavenderish hued buds. I don't know if it's on a weed or just what. I have no clue what this plant is. I had depth. I had things to focus on. I had a background. It just worked. Technically, it was everything I wanted in my first shot. I had done earlier, just moments before I did this shot, a focus stack where I moved the lens manually, and I was like, enough. I'm definitely going to go ahead and dive in to this focus bracketing feature. So this next shot that I'm showing you does show a fair amount of depth of field, but it's pretty much the last set of images that I made. Now let's talk about it just a little bit with what exactly we're talking about with this focus bracketing feature. And I know there's other manufacturers that have a similar setup. And so if you're using one of those other manufacturers, by all means, check it out. See if you can do this. They might have different terminologies, though. I haven't looked into what these other manufacturers call them. So what we're looking at, though, is we set the focus point, and then we tell the camera, okay, for this many shots, I want you to adjust slightly the point of focus, and then it'll just record those shots. So this feature that I'm using is on the R5, and I'd be shocked if it weren't on the R6, and I'm sure they're on other cameras as well, but I know of it on the R5, and it's found in what they call the Shoot 5 menu page. So when you're in your menu items, it's the red ones. The one all the way to the left has a little camera icon, and then it's the 5th page over. And so it's called focus bracketing. So you can either enable it or disable it, of course. And enabling it turns it on until you tell it to turn off. There are some features where you turn something on and it'll only do it like one time, and you have to keep re-enabling it. This is one of those features where it will just stay on until you tell it to turn off, which is kind of nice. The next option that you have, other than able or disable, so the next option down, is how many shots you want to make. So I started off with just 20 shots. I'm just testing it out, and I was like, you know what? I just want to see even just how this silly thing works. So 20 shots. The next one is they call focus increment. This is the one that is not super helpful in their description. Your options are from 1 to 10, and that means they also have a little descriptor, narrow and wide, respectively. So 1 is narrow, 10 is wide. But really, what does that mean? That's where, of course, testing comes into play. And I do have more testing to do to fully understand this. The biggest thing I want to think about is if I'm on my other lens. So let's say I'm doing a focus stack on the 24 to 105 lens, and I just want to do a basic focus stack, I could probably be on a setting of between 5 and 7, maybe even 10, and it would get exactly what I need. But when I'm on the macro, I definitely found I need to be in that 1 to 2 range. And that's what I ended up doing. I ended up taking a series of shots at the focus increment of 5, and then I switched it to a focus increment of 4, then 3, then 2, then 1. And I got those same 20 shots, and all I did was I changed the focus increment. Now, the way it behaves is it will take your focus point, wherever you're focused on, and it will use that as a starting point, and then it will shift. It'll take a shot. It'll shift the focus slightly. It'll take another shot. It'll shift the focus a little more. It'll take another shot until it gets its full 20 shots. So when I'm doing an increment level of 5, it goes way deeper on the subject, where an increment level of 1 just goes a little bit on the subject. And then, of course, I got everything in between. And if you'd like to see all of that and what that really entails, please take a look at that YouTube video that I've mentioned. It'll be there, and you can see all of that detail for you. One more final option before I get too far down the line. They also have an option. This is back in the menu settings for this focus bracketing feature. They have a setting called exposure smoothing. There's no description on the camera with what that exactly does. And so this one, I just decided to leave disabled, because all you have is the option to enable it or, of course, disable it. And so I would need to do further testing. But from the sounds of it, I'm pretty sure I don't want to turn it on, because if it's going to adjust my exposure at all, I don't want to have that happen. Not while I'm doing a focus stack. That just seems counterintuitive to me. I don't know why I would want to do that. So I left it off. If it literally is something else, then that's where I need to test it out and see what goes on with that. All right, so let's go a little bit deep. That first shot I did, which again, if you want to see all those details about what those focus increments mean and exactly how it changed in whatnot, go look at that YouTube video. It'll be a great resource for you. But going deep, I decided, you know what, that first shot, okay, kind of got my feet wet a little bit, dipped my toe in the water, so to speak. It's time to go amazingly deep. And so as I was looking around, I found this set of grasses, whatever we're going to call it, sprig of grass or whatever, that had dew just covering the whole thing. And I just thought that was really awesome. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do it to 120 frames. And so I was like, yeah, this is going to be really awesome. So I framed it up, and I was all getting fearful, like, just even setting up my tripod is going to shake the grasses and do whatever, and it causes those water droplets to fall off. Well, thankfully, I was good enough. I didn't do that. And on the show notes page, I have these items about in the middle of the page. It's titled Frame 1, Frame 120, and Frame 240. So it shows the first frame, the middle frame, and the last frame in getting this whole shot. And as I was framing it up, I was absolutely mesmerized by those droplets, the whole detail of it. But of course, I'm only getting a tiny fraction of them actually in focus. And that, of course, is what this focus stacking is about. So I set it to an increment of 1, if I remember right, because I just wanted the maximum opportunity. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen with, am I at the right depth of field or whatever else. I wanted the smallest increment just to guarantee as much as possible. And so the frame 120, yeah, same idea. It's just, it's focused in the middle of the area. And then frame 240, some of the background elements are in focus. And I was just like, oh, this is so great, so awesome. I did a couple more times, but, really it's just like, how many different things am I going to get? Now, I did have the camera set to 120 frames. And so when I clicked it, it got its 120 frames. And that's where I made the decision at frame 120. I was like, I just need to do this again. So I left it focused where it was. I hit the shutter button again, and it got another 120. And so as it goes through the entire focus area there, it got nearly everything in focus. Now, as I was making my decision, I was like, no, I don't want these things in the upper right-hand corner to be fully in focus. And by the time I had finished the shoot, I really wasn't inspecting everything that I should have inspected. And we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's talk about making the stack here. So Helicon Focus did make it real easy. This seems like it's a big commercial for Helicon Focus. And again, there's other focus stacking solutions out there. But with Helicon Focus, I was able to send the raw data from Lightroom to Helicon Focus, and then I was able to stack it and then bring it back. Now, I figured with 240 frames that this would take at least 30 minutes. Now, I've got one of the newest MacBook Pro computers. It's a 14-inch with the M1 Max. It's got 32 gigs of RAM and I don't know, something on the video card. It's one of the better ones that they make. It's not the top line, but it's one of the better ones they make. And it's wicked fast, especially as internal hard drive. I downloaded the Blackmagic Designs hard drive test utility. And this is at over 5,000, whereas your standard external spinning USB hard drive is just, 120, 140, somewhere in there. And so this internal hard drive is over 5,000. And I was just like, yeah, that is extremely fast. So it does really well and really pleased with how fast it works. So when I'm in Helicon, it just did its things. And again, you can look at that video on YouTube. I go through this whole process as well on that same video. And then the end result. All right. I call this for learning purposes only. This is something that I'm not really proud of this image. I'm not proud of this image in the sense that the subject turned out to be kind of just ho-hum, and the end result did not match my anticipation that I had when I was in the field. So there's just a huge disconnect from what I was hoping would happen to what actually did happen. And I tell my students all the time, actually, that I get such a reaction from this. It's so funny that I hope they fail. And for you, I don't know that I want to make it sound like, I hope you fail kind of a thing, because that's the wrong thing to say, especially if you're not physically in front of someone and you have their attention. When I'm in the classroom and I say that, there's a different connection there than you listening in your earbuds and this is all you hear me say. No, that's not the point. But the point is, when we do make mistakes, if we have what it takes to, pull up our bootstraps and get at it again, understand what happened, learn from that, and move forward, you're unstoppable. And there's nothing that you can't do if you have the right attitude. And certainly that's what I tell my students at the university. I hope you fail, because what that means is you know how not to do it. You know how to address the issue. You have the ability to retool your efforts and to get out there and make something of significance and make something that has meaning to you and has meaning to others for sure. So yes, let's learn from our mistakes. And maybe you can, of course, hopefully learn from my mistake a little bit. All right, so the issues on this final frame. I do not like how the water drops fade off in the upper right corner. When I was there in the field, I was envisioning this thing kind of like I would envision a standard image with how the depth of field drops off. And it's much more gradual on a regular lens than on a macro lens. On the macro lens, it goes quick. So as I was putting the image together, I could see it more clearly. Everything is beautifully in focus. All those little droplets of water, then all of a sudden, bang, it changes to no discernible detail whatsoever, and it just goes blurry. It's just hideous. Now, I did end up actually cropping this image once, and I was like, yeah, that's nice, but then the composition stinks. I didn't care for the composition. So, whatever. I just didn't see what was going on when I was setting up the shot. And certainly as I go forward in my macro shootings, this is going to be something I'm going to be able to address. Now on this image as well, if you're looking at on the website or in the Facebook group, I really darkened the background. Basically it's pitch black. I just felt the background was too distracting, but also with what I got going on here, this is hideous too. But I decided to publish this image anyway, just so we could really emphasize the subject matter. And so that's with the dark background. So we're emphasizing that subject matter. That's great. But as I was setting up that shot, and as I was focusing closer and closer to the background elements, those background elements became a little bit less blurred and a little bit more rendered. Now, they're still not anywhere near full on rendered. You can scroll back up the page and you can take a look at frame 240. But there is significantly more detail than in frame 1. So that's just something that if I had had all of the detail where I needed it, whatever detail was there in the background probably would not be the issue that it is now, because right now it's an issue because I don't have all the detail where I need it. So it's one of those things, if I'd done right and gotten everything in focus that I needed to be in focus, then that not as blurry background just wouldn't be that much of an issue. All right, and so then the focus fall off, the third issue, is the focus fall off in the lower portion of the image. That's not too good either. And the grass that extends upwards from the lower left corner is also not completely in focus because it's at a little bit of an angle, and so some of it's in focus and some of it's not in focus. And that depth of field is so incredibly shallow that once it ends, it just ends and it just goes whoop, and it's instantly blurry. So the basic fix for all this is to overshoot and then pare it down if you need to. Either limit the overall scope of what is in focus that you're sending to Helicon Focus, or otherwise do some manipulations in Photoshop if you need to. Whatever it is, what I'm going to be doing next time is I'm going to guarantee that I'm vastly simplifying the frame, and I'm going to make sure that everything gets in focus that needs to be in focus. So that's what I'm going to be looking for, and then some. Get even more in focus than what I think I need. That's the next stage that I want to go to. All right, what about some successes? Of course, there are some successes here. That focus bracketing feature is brilliant. I love it, and I'm definitely going to be using it going forward for any of my focus stacked images. The details also that are rendered are amazing. At 45 megapixels, focus stacking, and keeping that raw data throughout the process, it's all good. I love it. And of course, I had a blast out there. I had my dog with me, which I'm really not a dog person, so don't be all like, oh yeah, but it was cool. I'm kind of sort of warming up to that idea, I guess. I'm really more of a cat person. And I had one of my cats out there too. He's become, ever since we got this dog, it's kind of funny, he has become an absolute field cat. We do not see him until we go to the back pasture. And that's where he hangs out. And that's all he does. Whenever we take a walk, he'll come out, he'll nuzzle, he'll let me pick him up, and he snuggles and all sorts of things. And the dog and the cat, they do great. I don't know why, but this cat, his name is Inky, that is where he has hung out for the last several months, ever since we've had this dog. Anyway, it was a blast, and definitely looking forward to doing it again, as the season continues, whether it's going to be looking at some of our final pumpkins and some of those intricate details when you're looking at the stem as it comes off the pumpkin. Oh my goodness, so cool. Such awesome stuff. I love it. So yes, I look forward to getting out there and exploring some of that as well. My ultimate goal, all right, it's always good, I think, to have this kind of thing. An ultimate goal is what I'm going to call it. I want to create a series of images that are massive prints. So I've got the printer to do it. Hallelujah. Oh my goodness. But I want to do it of the tiny world. Maybe it's going to be some flowers. Maybe it's going to be some bugs. Maybe it's going to be grasses. Maybe it's going to be a combination of the both. I don't know at this point. But I've had this idea for quite a while where I just love the idea of macro and exploring the unseen world because it's so small we don't really see it with our eyes, with our naked eyes. I just want to make some awesome prints like that and hopefully get them in a couple of galleries here in town. That would just be so cool. And if I can't get them in some galleries in town, then I'll just arrange to have a show at the school's gallery once again. I got to get these out in the world, and that would be a way to make it happen. And of course, I have the ability to make it happen, which I'm thrilled about. All right, it is time to wrap it up. So grateful to have you here. Certainly, please do reach out if there's anything that we can do for you on some feedback or whatever the case is. I just would love to hear what you have to say. Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com. And today's dose of inspiration comes from Luke 16:10. In the New Living Translation, it says, "If you are faithful in the little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities." How true that is. With the little things you learn, and then you go and you can do well with bigger responsibilities for sure. And I liked that idea with, just because we're looking at the macro world in this last part of this episode and these little things and showcasing them big. That's just, it's exciting. And then somewhat out of context, Robert Capa, his famous quote, "If your pictures aren't good enough, then you're not close enough." Of course, he wasn't thinking about the macro world, and I get that, but it still rings true. Get in close and see what you can find, and it'll just be amazing. I would love for you to share some images of anything close up. It doesn't have to be literally macro, but anything close up that you have that you'd like to put in the Facebook group. Go on and make a share. That would be amazing. I would love to see it. All right, well, that wraps us up for today. And in our next episode, I honestly don't know what's going to be next because I've got a lot of interests out there for bringing people in to interview. One fellow from the North Carolina area with the Great Smoky National Park region, and another person from the United Kingdom area, Scotland in particular. And then, of course, I have dreams of doing an episode about what it is all about with making a gallery on your website and talking in depth about the first releases, or at least the highlights I'm going to do. I'm going to showcase one image or two images that are really special to me in this particular gallery, and we're going to talk about that as well in a future episode. So again, thanks so much. Keep on listening, and if you haven't listened to much in the back catalog, if you're a new listener, by all means, check out the back catalog and take a listen. We've got lots of great episodes for you to feast your ears upon. But until next time, God bless and happy shooting.